The Persian Gulf is on fire, and Washington still doesn't have a plan. 13 days into the conflict, after the United States and Israel launched surprise strikes on Iran on February 28th, killing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, the world is waking up to something far more dangerous than any Pentagon briefing prepared Americans for. Explosive-laden Iranian boats struck two fuel tankers in Iraqi territorial waters, the Safe Sea Vishnu and the Zephyros, setting them ablaze and killing at least one crew member. Iraq, in response, suspended all oil terminal operations, the first time in modern history that Iraqi ports have gone dark because of Iranian military action inside Iraqi sovereign waters. Let that sink in for a moment. Tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, the critical choke point through which roughly 20% of the world's daily oil supply passes, has effectively dropped to zero. Iran's military has threatened oil prices climbing to $200 a barrel, and Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, issued his first address vowing to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed and continue attacks on U.S. bases across the region. This is not a skirmish. This is not a limited exchange of fire. This is the restructuring of global energy power, and every American filling up their tank, paying their grocery bill, or watching their retirement account is already living the consequences. The question Washington refuses to answer honestly is simple. What is the end game? Because right now, Iran is the one with a strategy, and we are the ones reacting. Now, I want you to understand something that the mainstream media in this country is completely failing to explain to you. What is happening in the Persian Gulf right now is not just a military confrontation. It is a carefully orchestrated economic siege, and Iran is executing it with more discipline and strategic coherence than Washington has shown at any point in the last 2 weeks. When you strip away the Pentagon briefings, strip away the political theater, strip away Trump standing at a rally in Hebron, Kentucky claiming in the first hour it was over, what you are left with is a cold, hard reality. Iran still has a functioning leadership, a surviving military apparatus, and a clear strategy to inflict maximum economic pain on the United States and its allies without ever having to win a single conventional battlefield engagement. The Paris-based International Energy Agency, one of the world's most credible authorities on global energy markets, stated plainly this week that the 13 days of conflict have caused the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market, surpassing even the oil shocks of the 1970s. Read that again slowly. Surpassing the 1970s. That was the crisis that triggered gas lines around the block in American cities, that reshaped global financial architecture, that contributed directly to the worst economic decade America experienced in the 20th century. And we are being told today by our leadership that we've essentially won this thing. That defies logic, and frankly, it insults the intelligence of every American paying attention. Let's go back to what happened overnight on March 12th, because the details matter enormously. Explosive-laden Iranian boats struck two fuel tankers in Iraqi territorial waters, the Marshall Islands-flagged Safe Sea Vishnu and the Maltese-flagged Zephyros, setting both vessels ablaze and killing at least one crew member. Iraqi rescue teams pulled 25 sailors out of the water while both ships continued to burn. India's embassy in Baghdad confirmed that an Indian crew member aboard the Safe Sea Vishnu was killed, while the remaining 15 Indian crew members were evacuated to safety. These are real human beings. These are merchant sailors doing their jobs in international shipping lanes, and they are dying because the architects of this war never built a credible plan to protect the waterways that feed the global economy. And here is the part that should anger every American who is paying their own bills right now. Iraq, in direct response to these attacks, shut down all oil port operations across the country. Iraq, the country the United States spent over $2 trillion rebuilding, stabilizing, and militarily occupying for nearly 2 decades. The country that was supposed to be a pillar of American strategic influence in the Middle East is now shutting its ports because Iran is attacking ships inside Iraqi sovereign waters, and Baghdad cannot stop it. Think about what that tells you about the balance of power in the region today. Think about what that tells you about the return on the American taxpayers' investment in that part of the world. Now, I want to walk you through the broader picture because this attack on the Iraqi tankers is not an isolated event. It is part of a deliberate escalating campaign that Iran has been prosecuting across multiple theaters simultaneously. Iranian drones have struck fuel tanks and a tanker at the port of Duqm in Oman, with at least one direct hit on a fuel storage tank causing a massive explosion. On the same day, a drone strike was recorded at the port of Salalah, which handles fuel and industrial minerals. Earlier in the week, Qatar's Ministry of Defense reported that Iranian drones had targeted an energy facility in Ras Laffan belonging to Qatar Energy, the world's largest LNG producer, forcing a suspension of liquefied natural gas production at the impacted sites. Qatar supplies a significant portion of Europe's natural gas. Europe, which is already energy stressed, is now watching one of its primary alternative energy suppliers go quiet because of a war Washington launched without a serious diplomatic framework in place. Saudi Arabia's Ras Tanura oil refinery, one of the largest oil refining complexes on the planet, owned by Saudi Aramco, was forced to halt operations after debris from intercepted Iranian drones caused a fire on its premises. Saudi Aramco controls 12% of global oil production. We are not talking about minor disruptions at the margins of the energy market. We are talking about systematic, coordinated strikes on the central nervous system of the global energy economy. Iran is not improvising here. This is a strategy, and it is working. Shipping traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow choke point that connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and through which roughly 20% of global oil and gas ordinarily flows, has virtually ground to a halt since the United States and Israel launched strikes on February 28th. Environmental group Greenpeace has now mapped 85 large oil tankers that are stuck in the Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz region, carrying a combined total of 21 billion liters of oil. These ships are not moving, their crews are in danger, their cargo is trapped, and every single day they sit there, the pressure on global oil prices grows more intense. Iran's military spokesperson said bluntly this week that the world should prepare for oil at $200 a barrel, arguing that regional security has been destabilized by American action. Now, whether Iran can actually sustain the conditions necessary to push oil to that level is a separate analytical question. But the psychological and market impact of that statement alone is measurable and real. International benchmark Brent crude surged as much as 10% in a single trading session as the crisis deepened, even after the International Energy Agency coordinated the single largest strategic reserve release in history, 400 million barrels across 32 member countries, and the market still moved higher. That tells you something profound about what traders and analysts actually believe about the duration and severity of this conflict. They do not believe the official narrative of a quick American victory. They are pricing in a prolonged, grinding disruption. Now, let me address something that I think is critically important for you to understand about the economic dimension of this. This is not just about gasoline prices, though those matter enormously to working Americans. A near-total halt of tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has disrupted the supply of fuel and essential fertilizers, threatening global food security in ways that echo the food crisis of 2022. The Fertilizer Institute has stated that nearly half of global urea and sulfur exports, the fertilizers that American and global farmers depend on to grow food, transit through the Strait of Hormuz. When those shipments stop, it does not immediately show up on your dinner table. But in 12 to 18 months, when crop yields decline and food prices spike, that is when ordinary Americans will understand in a visceral and personal way what the consequences of a poorly planned military campaign look like. I want you to think about who is hurt most by these dynamics. It is not the defense contractors. It is not the politicians. It is not the generals giving press briefings in comfortable conference rooms in Washington. It is the American family filling up their gas tank to get to work. It is the small business owner watching their shipping and logistics costs spiral upward. It is the farmer trying to plan next season's planting while fertilizer costs become unpredictable. These are real consequences that flow directly from strategic decisions made without adequate forethought about second and third order effects. Iran has made clear over the past several days that its strategy is to impose a prolonged economic shock on the world in order to force President Trump to step back from the maximalist demands he has made, including calls for Iran's unconditional surrender. That is Iran's theory of victory, and I have to tell you honestly, it is not an unreasonable theory. Economic pain has a way of concentrating political minds even in Washington. The question is whether the American political establishment has the intellectual honesty to recognize when a campaign has produced consequences that were neither anticipated nor desired, and to adjust course accordingly. 3 sources familiar with the matter told Reuters this week that U.S. intelligence indicates Iran's leadership is still largely intact and not at risk of collapse anytime soon. That is the fundamental intelligence assessment that should be driving every strategic decision right now. You cannot build a coherent endgame around a theory, unconditional Iranian surrender, and a U.S. determined leadership transition in Tehran, that the intelligence community itself does not believe is achievable on any near-term timeline. That is a recipe for a prolonged conflict with no exit ramp. Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, in his first public statement since assuming power following his father's death, declared that the Strait of Hormuz must remain closed as a tool of pressure against the enemy, and that all American military bases in the Middle East should be shut down immediately or face continued attack. This is not the posture of a government on the verge of collapse. This is not the messaging of a leadership that believes it is losing. This is a government that has concluded it can absorb military punishment while simultaneously using economic disruption as its primary offensive weapon, and it is betting that the American public will grow tired of paying the price before Tehran bends the knee. The effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz has led to Iraq, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia cutting oil output. Saudi Arabia is now redirecting some of its exports via pipeline to Yanbu on its Red Sea coast. Loadings are continuing from Fujairah, the UAE's main export terminal outside the strait, but some ship owners are already avoiding Fujairah due to the expanding risk of Iranian attack. In other words, even the workarounds are becoming vulnerable. The geographic net that Iran is casting is widening, not narrowing, with each passing day. And I want to close on this point with absolute clarity. The United States military is the finest fighting force this nation has ever produced. The men and women serving in that force are doing extraordinary work under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. This is not a question of their courage or their capability. This is a question of whether the strategic framework they have been handed is coherent, whether there is an achievable objective, a realistic timeline, and an honest accounting of what victory actually looks like in a theater this complex. Right now, the answer to all 3 of those questions is troubling at best. The tankers burning in Iraqi waters tonight are not just a military problem. They are a mirror held up to a strategy that has not yet reckoned with the full scope of what it has set in motion.